Welcome to this DW Business Special, investigating the security of Europe's energy supply. In the wake of apparent attacks on the pipelines that supply the EU with its natural gas, the bloc is reassessing the vulnerability of its energy infrastructure. As well as the physical resilience of supplies, Europe is also working swiftly to improve its broader energy security and end its sensitivity to factors beyond its control. I'm Rob Watts in Berlin, and I'm joined by Olga Khakova, Deputy Director of European Energy Security at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Centre. Welcome to the programme, Olga. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So, does Europe have an energy security problem?
Yeah, Europe has a Russia problem, which in turn has become an energy security problem. Europe has actually invested quite a bit in the last several decades in diversifying its energy markets, in integrating the energy markets, and decoupling ownership of different energy assets, making sure there's a lot of competition, both on the electricity side and the natural gas side. But having this monumental reliance on Russian energy sources, and then having Russia weaponize these energy sources in order to push Europe to reduce its reliance, to reduce its support for Ukraine, has resulted in this current energy crisis.
Is Russia really the only source of energy security concern within the EU, though?
No, absolutely not. To be fair, the energy crisis that we're experiencing today actually, kicked off late last year. As you recall, the prices already started going up, and this was before the war. But Russia did everything in its power to exacerbate it. So would we still be experiencing higher prices, some challenges across the energy sector right now had it not been because of Russia? Sure, there would be some higher prices, some volatility across the market, but not to the extent that we are experiencing right now. Russia has self-sanctioned itself and all its natural gas exports to Europe to unprecedented low levels. We're only seeing about 40 BCM going through Ukraine's pipeline network right now, compared to 155. And in some of the higher years, and I would say over the last 5-10 years, some of those exports to Europe were up to 200 BCM on the higher end, at about 155, 145 in the last several recent years, when we saw some of the demand go down due to COVID and other reasons.
Let's discuss the recent attacks on the Baltic Sea pipelines that normally supply Russian gas to Europe, because Olga did just mention the pipelines. Gas started to gush out of leaks in both the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 gas lines between Russia and Europe last week. The points where the leaks occurred are marked here in red, as you can just see them there. The EU suspects sabotage is behind it. Swedish investigators say they found evidence of detonations at those leakage points. So back to Olga Khakova on this. I mean, these leaks are too much of a coincidence not to be sabotage, right?
100%. Not a coincidence with this many explosions happening back to back on both strings, on both of the pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. It's important to remember that Russia actually stopped sending gas through Nord Stream 1 in the beginning of September, and Nord Stream 2 never sent any gas to Europe because the pipeline was sanctioned as a result of Russia's attack on Ukraine. So Russia had a lot of different reasons, even though right now we still don't have that 100% confirmation, but everything is pointing to Russia. All of the incentives are for Russia to be behind this, because by doing this, Russia has created volatility across the energy markets. We've seen some pricing starting to go down in terms of the natural gas prices, futures. And then, of course, following these explosions, this volatility has caused the market to rally back up, particularly for natural gas. There's this uncertainty around, well, could other pipelines be next, and what kind of response would that need from NATO? Could it invoke Article 5? And of course, the disinformation war that Russia has launched with this, just kind of blaming this or this country. And, it's interesting too, because each pipeline has two strings. Nord Stream 1 has two strings and Nord Stream 2 has two strings. Both of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline strings were harmed in explosions. Only one of the strings of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was blown up. So now Russia is offering to send gas through the second string that was unharmed to Europe. Kind of, if you look at like Russia's overall strategy of sending gas through Nord Stream 2, something they've been working on and has spent billions of dollars. And I'm not just talking, the actual pipeline, but if you look at kind of all of the other infrastructure that's involved with it, it's just billions and billions of investments. So, and it also just showcases that it's a message saying we're willing to blow up our own pipelines just to send a message and show you how serious we are about this energy war.
Yeah, I mean, how vulnerable is Europe's energy supply to physical attacks like this, given that it is relying on things like gas and oil that have to be transported one way or another?
Right. So, not coincidentally, this happened the day that the Baltic pipe went online, connecting Poland with Norwegian supplies. So it was also, another way to kind of create this fear of, could other critical infrastructure across Europe be next? But if Russia was to attack other infrastructure across Europe, I mean, that could very likely invoke Article 5, and that is not a response that Russia wants or is ready for. So yes, everyone is on high alert. If you see what's happening in Norway, they actually are sending off their military to keep a closer eye on all of the critical infrastructure. There's, intelligence sharing, greater attention being paid to any of this, not just actual physical threats, but also cyber threats to some of this infrastructure, greater cooperation there. So Europe and US are on high alert, and they're ready to react if anything like that is to happen.
Okay. Well, just moving on from pipelines, this week, the OPEC Plus group of oil-producing nations, including Russia, made a move that's likely to make energy even harder to come by for the West. They're planning to cut production by 2 million barrels per day in the face of falling crude prices. The US called the decision by OPEC Plus short-sighted, but OPEC members say they are working to support energy security.
We'll continuously prove that OPEC Plus is here not only to stay, but here to stay as a moderating force to bring about stability.
We are not endangering the energy markets. We are providing security, stability to the energy markets.
At a price.
Everything has a price. Energy security has a price as well.
Just to make a broader point on Europe's energy security relating to oil, does Europe's continued reliance on oil as an energy source mean that it's actually quite vulnerable to decisions like this from organizations like OPEC?
Right. So there is vulnerability in kind of overall fossil fuel reliance because of the volatility in the markets there. And, not just oil, natural gas as well. And then, of course, anytime there is a cartel or some kind of a decision-making body that can restrict or decide to ramp up production and just kind of make that announcement, within a couple of days, that risk still exists. And this is why we're seeing U.S. kind of trying to figure out how to respond to this. There are some increased calls for NOPEC legislation to be brought back up, and we don't know if we'll actually pass. And kind of right now, everyone is just looking into the implications of if that was to move forward, what would that mean for the global oil market? But yes, there's definitely a risk fossil fuels, but right now this is kind of where our economy is. I think there's overall agreement across the world that yes, we need to move towards a net zero economy, but what does that actually look like, and what is the realistic path to get there, particularly in this high price market environment? That's a tough part, and as you have all of these geopolitical tensions that are making any kind of definitive plans, they're just throwing a wrench into them.
Right. Olga, stay with us. Just want to cross over to something else here. The EU's trying to shore up its own energy security by finding alternatives to Russian gas. Now, liquefied natural gas from the US and the Middle East is set to play a bigger role in Europe's energy future as a result of that. But getting it to member states is one of the big challenges. Europe's biggest importer of LNG is Spain. It has 6 major terminals taking shipments. However, there are currently just 2 pipelines linking those shipments with the rest of the EU. That's why this week, Germany's Chancellor Scholz and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez agreed the need to finish a 3rd pipeline, MidCat, that you can see here, by 2025. So, Olga Khakova, there's a great race to secure LNG at great expense, but how wise an investment is LNG?
So LNG and natural gas overall will continue playing a really important role in European energy security and also Europe's decarbonization efforts as well. Particularly when we look at this year, we saw a huge ramp up of coal generation and plants that were formerly phased out, closed down, or on track to be closed down are being fired back up. So anytime you're replacing coal with natural gas, you're already getting decarbonization there. Anytime we're replacing Russian natural gas, even pipeline natural gas coming from Russia, because of how they produce it, because of the lack of transparency, because we already have the data that we do have right now, we know that other suppliers, particularly U.S. And others around the world, do produce it at a lower carbon intensity. So by simply switching from Russian natural gas, you're already getting that decarbonization benefit. But at the same time, there will still have to be a ramped-up efforts around for these natural gas exporters to reduce methane emissions and overall carbon intensity across the value chain of natural gas. And this conversation about integrating Iberia with the rest of Europe, this has been brought out for the last several decades, if you would. And it's interesting that now that this energy crisis has finally kind of jolted this project into reality. But it is a tremendous opportunity because that region does have multiple LNG terminals, which much of Europe is still lacking. But even FSRUs are being built out at a record pace. Germany is looking into getting 5 done by the end of this year, which is just, incredible. Once again, Germany was also talking about LNG terminals for the last 5-10 more years, and now with this energy crisis and Nord Stream 2, Nord Stream 1 not sending any gas, now it's finally jolting Germany into these investments.
Yeah, Germany's certainly setting its stall by LNG. But Germany's position on energy security is also that there needs to be much more interconnectivity among Europe's networks, so energy can be shared when the member states are running low. So here's what Chancellor Scholz had to say at this week's meeting of the new European Political Community in Prague.
We need to improve infrastructures everywhere. That applies to Central and Eastern Europe, to Southern and Central Europe, to Western and Central Europe, and that applies to Northern and Central Europe. That's part of it, that we build a European grid. It's important for the electricity grid, the gas grid, and the future hydrogen grid.
So, Olga, is Europe's future energy security dependent on how well member states can work together?
100%. Solidarity has been critical from the very beginning of this horrible attack on Ukraine, and having countries kind of align on their response, on their support for Ukraine, but also just overall multiple sanction packages. If you think about how many have been passed, they just approved they just rolled out the 8th sanctions package, which is just incredible. If you think about 27 member states agreeing on these ginormous measures, and then at the same time, looking at how to restructure the energy market. So the solidarity is extremely important, as was mentioned in the remark just a couple seconds ago, particularly as the countries go into winter and they will need to figure out how to manage the natural gas that's being stored, making sure that that's being properly shared. And of course, on electricity, the markets have been integrated quite well, and a lot of investments went into from the EU funds to make sure that the electricity markets are well connected. But there's still opportunities in some parts of Europe, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, and as we look into some of the southeastern areas as well, for even further integration. Further integration means more efficient operating markets. It means that maybe if it's the right signals being sent, say for one country, for example, that may have larger let's say, hydro sources or other sources, if they're going through a drought or something else, then they can integrate and they can get electricity sent from other countries. Same thing when it comes to natural gas.
Right. Well, a lot of changes coming in Europe's energy infrastructure and the future ways in which we keep the lights on here in Europe. Olga Khakova from the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Centre, thank you so much for joining us on this DW Business Special.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And thanks also to you for watching. There's plenty more from the DW Business team on the DW News YouTube channel. Please go there and check it out. We've got a wonderful series called Business Beyond, where we take a look at the broader implications of the news stories we follow day to day. Until next time, take care.